A few months ago, I was invited to, or given the opportunity to speak tonight. And then they said, what will your topic be? And I have lots of different topics that I can talk about. And so I came up with this science of human wellness. And what's interesting is that since I came up with that and the questions and everything that you probably read about tonight, I went through a transition, a major transition. And it's hard to explain the transition except for just to tell you that it had a lot to do with what Joe did tonight, about just being present, being now. And before, and I've been a guest speaker in many different places, and I've done workshops and seminars and stuff like that. But what's changed in me just in the last couple of months is that, before I would have PowerPoint presentation and I would have a whole syntax and bullet points, and I had a direction of where I wanted you to start and where I wanted you to go. And so when I created this talk tonight, that was the mindset I was in, but I'm a different person now. So we're still going to cover the information there, and if there's anything that we wrote on there that you came here to get tonight, please feel free. I'll give you a chance to ask me questions or whatever. And the topic is still kind of the same. It's just not going to be as the 2 questions and the 5 questions and all this kind of stuff. So what I want to kind of do tonight is that I am going to ask a lot of questions, and that we're going to have a conversation, because it's not important what I know, it's really more important what you're here to get. And I just want to be a conduit of that information just to kind of flow through me and to you tonight. And so the best way I know how to do it is just to be authentic and kind of come from a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit about my story, where I came from, and then talk to you about why the science of human wellness is such a passionate thing for me, why I'm so passionate about that. Okay? Is that fair enough?
Sure.
Awesome. So let me tell you just a quick story about myself. I would label myself kind of like the typical American kid. And when I say typical, I mean to say that I didn't get raised in a holistic community or in a holistic family or anything like that. Okay? I was first generation born in America on my mom's side. She was born and raised in Mexico. And she married my stepdad, who did have an education. However, when he grew up was, him and his brothers would drink gallons and gallons of milk and lots of homemade bread and all this kind of stuff, right? So, and it was an Italian family on my dad's side, a Mexican family on my mom's side. So there was a lot of pasta and tacos, burritos, and things like that. And but mostly tacos and bread. Pastas and bread. And when I started out in my life, as a very young child, the earliest that I can remember, I was already sick. And what I mean by that is that I had chronic earaches, and I remember some of them, they would take me to my knees, constantly getting earaches, to the point that eventually then the sore throats, the runny noses, things like that. Has anybody seen a lot of kids around in this society like that? Yeah, so that's what I mean by typical. I'm hoping that's going to change, that that's not going to be typical anymore. But that's how I was raised. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll cover that in a second. But just kind of fast forwarding through time, so eventually what happened is because I had so many of these earaches, I developed a disease called otosclerosis, which is the hardening or thickening of the inner ear bones, okay? Which led me to start losing my hearing. So by the time I was about 4 or 5, I had lost over 60% of my hearing on that. And then, so once they discovered that, they gave me hearing aids, and that did bring my hearing up. But I was already starting to have some developmental delays in speech and learning and so on and so forth. And then as I got older, then I started having really awful sore throats. And I still was having ear infections even after we had put tubes in my ears 3 times, right? And so eventually they said, well, we need to take out the tonsils and the adenoids, right? How many people have heard that? That's pretty common. And how many people still have their tonsils today? Okay, well good, that's awesome. I wish I had mine. But as I got through, and here's the thing, I needed an intervention, and that was what was available, and my parents did the best they could with what they were raised and what they were taught. And so I honor that. And I don't bash medicine, and I don't blame anything on my parents. but that's what my reality was, okay? And then because I kept on getting on these colds and flus and sinus issues and earaches and everything else, they were constantly taking me to the doctor. So I would constantly have antibiotics and cold syrup, or cough syrup and things like that. And it just kept on getting more and more of that as I got older. Okay. Now, as I got into my preteen and early teen years, things seemed to kind of calm down a little bit for me in the health world. Okay. Because it still got the common colds and flus, and I still went to the doctor to get the antibiotics and stuff every time that happened. However, for the most part, I felt like I was thriving for the first time. And then I got through high school, and then by the time I was 16, I was told that I could have surgery on my ears. And so I had a stapedectomy and had 2 bones replaced in my ears, and now I can hear about 95, 98%. Isn't that a miracle? Yeah. So I thank God for medicine. And also when I fell off a roof when I first got married to my wife and shattered my ankle in 3 different places, I was very thankful for medicine. Okay, so I just want to say that because I'm not a medicine basher, but I want to say that there's a place and a time for it, right? And we're using it way too much. And so my message and what I'm passionate about is to figure out how that, my story was very similar, and even my children, before I came across some of this information myself, were beginning that same pattern. My oldest child started having lots of earaches and runny noses and colds and stuff like that. And then we'd run to the doctors and get antibiotics and so on and so forth. And it wasn't until probably like my second or third child where we started getting them vaccinated. My oldest son was fully vaccinated. My second started to get vaccinated. My third got maybe 1 vaccination. And it was after she had a febrile seizure the day after or the night of the vaccination that we began to do some research. And that research took us down the whole new road. So let me tell you about the state that I was in at that time that my daughter had a febrile seizure. I was 65 pounds heavier than I am now. I was recently diagnosed at that time with sleep apnea, chronic fatigue syndrome, and that was the reason why, because I wasn't getting enough sleep, amongst other things, right? I had high cholesterol. They wanted to start putting me on cholesterol-lowering medication. I had high blood pressure and high triglycerides. I was constantly still getting colds and flu. Every time that flu season came around, I was getting those colds and flus as well. And then it turned into bronchitis, and then eventually pneumonia. And so right about that same time is when I got, that my daughter had a seizure, I also, right around that same time, had pneumonia. And the thing was, I was working at a job, I was working in manual labor, and I was working outside in the winter time. And I had promised my wife that I would just stick with this job no matter what, and I wouldn't take days off and things like that. So when I got this pneumonia, I didn't stop and rest or get healing for myself. And it wasn't until a doctor, I actually did a job for a doctor in the job that I was working, and the doctor was watching me out the window and seeing me cough and all this stuff was going on. And he came in and he sat down and looked at me and he said, "If you don't go to the hospital, you're going to be dead in a week." So that was my lowest point in my life. And then having to sleep with this mask over my mouth, in my nose, although I was very grateful for it, and I did finally start getting some sleep, and I didn't have to fall asleep at the wheel just driving 5 minutes to go to the grocery store. I knew that my life was in danger, except for if you would have asked me if I was healthy, I would say, I probably could do some things better, maybe eat some more vegetables, maybe exercise a little more, probably lose some weight, but overall I felt like I was pretty healthy, even with all those symptoms. And you know what? There are a lot of people out there that think that way. Knock on wood, I'm okay so far, right? And so when I would answer that way, if somebody ever would have followed up with another question like, well, why do you have all these symptoms? I probably would have said, well, I'm just getting older. Isn't that just what happens? You get older. I mean, my biological father has heart disease and diabetes, and my stepfather has heart disease and diabetes, and they got it as I got older, and that was my story. I mean, it's in my genes. It's what I expect to get. Now fast forward to where in 2007 when the economy fell out, and there's a whole lot more things in there, but for the sake of time, I'm going to leave a lot of it out. In 2007, I had the opportunity to lose a couple jobs and decided to go do a different career. And that's when I decided to become a chiropractor. Yeah. All right? So, and now, the thing was, when I decided to become a chiropractor, it was based on my own experience of having neck pain, back pain, and headache. And yet, when that chiropractor adjusted me and I went on a regular basis and got rid of those things, I thought that was fantastic. What a great job. What an awesome thing to do for people. And so when I had that opportunity to decide what I was going to do, I said, you know, I actually wanted to do this when I was 18 years old, but for a whole lot of different reasons we won't get into tonight, I just decided that I wasn't going to be able to do it. So now here I am, in, you know, about 32 years old, somewhere around there, decided to go back to school to become a chiropractor. And this time, though, I had a different mindset, and I went there. Now, the interesting thing that, and what I wanted to go into talk about tonight, is that being down at chiropractic school introduced me to some concepts that weren't even on my radar. Even just terminology like holism and naturalism and conservatism and all these things. I didn't know what any of those were. In fact, I can tell you that, you know, I was very simply raised, and that when I looked at my list of classes that I was going to have to take, I couldn't pronounce half the words and half the classes that were on there. That was my mindset. That was where I was at. But what was interesting and what was a blessing for me was that I got to stay for about 5.5 years in a community that had that mindset. That all I heard was about holism and about universal consciousness and about the innate intelligence of the body, and that how we were built to be healthy, and that we're not predetermined for sickness and disease. And so that started to make me question every belief I ever had at that time. And so, and then like at lunchtime, everybody would come out with their food, and it would all be salads around. I was like, this is a bunch of rabbit food out here. And so, but, you know, I had to pay attention to that. And as I'm going through biology classes and physiology classes, I started realizing that what goes in becomes me. It turns my body, the innate intelligence of my body and my cells, takes whatever I eat and turns that carrot into me. Isn't that interesting? And so